All right, wonderful. I'd like to welcome you all and happy Pride Month. Good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are dialing in. We're certainly grateful to have you here at Pride and Progreso, Redefining Leadership Through Diversity. This is a webinar brought to you by Prospanica Center for Social Justice. My name is Richard Lopez. My pronouns are he, him, and I'll be moderating today's session. We're very excited to have you here. And today's conversation really sits at the heart of our mission. As we celebrate Pride Month, we're uplifting voices and stories from the LGBTQ plus Latinx community. We're exploring how diverse identities and lived experiences are really reshaping what leadership looks like today. This webinar, Pride and Progreso, invites us to expand our definition of leadership, to recognize that progress doesn't just come from titles or institutions, but really from authenticity, from courage, from inclusion. And listen, we're honored today to be joined by a phenomenal group of panelists, individuals who are going to share their insights on navigating their identity in professional spaces and leading with purpose and what it means to build cultures of belonging. So we're very excited to have our attendees here and our panelists that will be joining us. Before we get started, I'd like to share a little bit more about myself. I am one of the founding members of the advisory board for Prospanica Center for Social Justice. I work for a company called UKG. We're an HR software company, and I lead global operations for our company's Belonging, Equity, and Impact team. I've been a diversity and inclusion practitioner for over a decade. And in my personal life, as a father, I have two young adults, and my youngest, who's 22 years old, identifies as non-binary and queer. And so, what we're going to be talking about today I believe, are going to be topics that we talk about very commonly at our dinner table. I stand in awe at my child's ability to navigate environments where they are often the only queer Latina in the room. And I'm just so inspired by their resilience and their courage. And they remind me often how important my role as ally is to them personally, but also to the community, to the broader community. And so my hope today is that you too will be reminded just how important it is to create spaces like this one to lift the voices of everyone in our Latina community. So without further ado, I'm excited to introduce you to our speakers today, Lily Gonzalez, Eliana Ramirez, and Zach Quilland. And I'd like to give each of you the opportunity to introduce yourself. So in a few sentences, if we could please have you introduce yourselves, and we'll start with Lily.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you all so much for having me. So, as you can hear in the twang, I am based in Texas by way of Tamaulipas. I am a program leader. I have a lot of experience in education access and industry partnerships. My background is in community school models and asset-centered engagement. So, more currently, I'm an education nonprofit manager, but I'm just very excited to be here with you all today.
Fantastic, Lily. We're excited to have you here as well. If we can go next to Eliana.
Thank you so much, Richard. It's really nice to be here with everyone. I'm honored to have been invited to be on a panel with Lily and Zach. My name is Eliana, and I was raised by a gay father and a heterosexual mother. And I go back 5 generations in my family. On my mother's side, having queer identified family members. Of course, 5 generations ago, queer wasn't even a word. But I am a researcher focusing on racial and LGBTQ workplace trauma. And I'm a social worker by profession. And I've served LGBTQ plus communities for decades now. I worked at Veterans Affairs for many years and created LGBT programming for veterans and LGBT staff and programs as well. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic, Eliana. We look forward to hearing your perspectives. And last but not least, Zach, would you like to go next?
I would love to go next. So, hey everybody, my name is Zach. I use he, him pronouns. I am based in LA, born and raised in East LA County, West Covina, for anybody out there who's watched the TV show Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. Eliana, when you said 5 generations, I was like, oh, her family must have been in the States for a really long time. And then you mentioned the queer aspect in there, and I was like, wait, 5 generations of like queer family members? I've never heard of that before. So I really want to just touch on that from a family perspective at some point today if time allows. But going back to who I am, Yeah, born and raised in LA. I'm currently an outreach and engagement specialist, helping position the Walt Disney Company as a company of choice to different communities out there. I've been with the company on and off for about 14 years. I got my MBA from Cal State Fullerton about, oh man, it's been 8 years already now. Um, I am also a leader on the Bolsas at Disney Belonging Employee Resource Group. So helping plan events that support and uplift the Hispanic Latina community at the Walt Disney Company. We have a really exciting Pride Month event coming up at the end of next week, and I'm excited to hold some space with you all and have this discussion during the month of June.
Amazing. Yeah, this is definitely a great time to be having this conversation. Very, very apropos. And the fact that this is a time when people are using their voices. You mentioned you're from LA, Zach. I know in your hometown and where I'm at, we're seeing more and more people use their voice. And so I'm excited that we can create this space for us to share our voices. And so with that said, I'd love to go into our first question. And Lily, I'll start with you on this one. And hopefully we can get feedback from all of you on this. But I want you to think about, we'd like for you to share a moment, if you can, personal moment when your authenticity really has made a tangible impact on your team, your community, and speak to your authenticity from your identity. If you identify as a queer Latin leader or any other intersectional identity, like give us a moment where it's been tangible and it's made an impact. Lily, let's see if we have you.
Thank you, Richard. I think I was on mute there for a second. Can you hear me now?
No problem. Yes, perfect.
Perfect. I think we speak a lot to our intersectionality within, I identify as a person who is queer. I am a first generation to college student. I have family that was repatriated. I have, immigrant parents. I think these days I reflect often on how fortunate I've been to have mentors in leadership that nurtured me being authentic, and very much recognize the value of my lived experiences. I do remember earlier on in my career being invited to support a Dream Summit. And so for Texas, within a large ISD in the greater Houston area, we had over 300 students and families that came to this event, and they were just learning more about college access resources, but it was a community based around it where it wasn't taboo, don't ask, don't tell, and it was great. Out of that event, I had the opportunity to network with other district leaders who also happened to be LGBTQIA, and we, got together with each other and we were like, we need something. This was great, but then we also need something else. Like, what else can we do from this? So I think having that support, that backup, was great for me because I was able to self-advocate, and we were able to create our own separate event that happened within the next year that was called the Pride Summit. And it was the first of its kind for this ISD. It was a great event. It centered a lot not only on resources for students, but for families as well. So, designed to explore identity, for self-care, for advocacy, and then just a sense of leadership, right? Because at the end of the day, my two bigger takeaways from that were leaders have to nurture authenticity. And then if a space doesn't exist, we have to create it, right? It's not just token inclusivity or token inclusion. For me as an employee, it was not only having a sense of belonging, but something that really belonged to me. So I think those would be my two that I would say.
Oh, that's amazing. And I'm from Texas. I live in Texas as well. And so to be able to make that impact in an IST, like in the state that we live in, I imagine that reverberated. That sounds amazing. Leaders nurture spaces of inclusion. I liked how you said that as well. Thank you, Lily. I'd like to ask the same question, if I may, to all of our panels. I think it's an opportunity for you to share a moment when you feel like you've made an impact. So, Eliana, how about we go with you next? A moment when your authenticity as a leader with your intersectional identities made a tangible impact.
Thank you. Well, I was at the Veterans Affairs for many years, as I mentioned, and I co-authored a transition at work policy for VA staff. It was the first of its kind and the Veterans Affairs is the largest healthcare provider in the nation. And so that was a great opportunity to support our trans and gender diverse colleagues. But really, mostly these policies are to help cisgender people to know how to show up, to create spaces where trans and gender diverse folks can do the great work that we know that they're qualified to do, by reducing barriers from systemic and institutional discrimination. Many times in our healthcare and other workplaces, cisgender and heterosexual people might say or do things like write a policy or create a practice, but they don't understand is actually quite othering for the LGBTQ plus person who's in front of them. And it may not be from a place of malice. It might just be that they don't know. They don't have to think about these things in order to navigate through the world on a daily basis. The other piece that I'll share is that I organized the first LGBTQ veteran suicide prevention conference in the nation, which brought together patient care advocates, suicide prevention coordinators, and what we refer to lovingly as LGBT veteran care coordinators. We know that the rates of suicide are astronomically high in LGBTQ communities, not because we suffer from more mental illness inherently, but because when people are hurt, they feel hurt. And so because we experience such high rates of discrimination at work and in healthcare systems and education systems as well, we really need to make sure that we're bringing in culturally responsive services. And I bring that up today because I just learned that the Trevor Lifeline is being canceled. And for our LGBTQ youth across the nation, we really need to have a place for folks to call in. So huge shout out to anyone who's heterosexual and cisgender who might be watching this, wanting to be an ally like yourself, Mr. Lopez.
Thank you, Eliana. That is a very personal, that one touches a button for me, that this suicide awareness and just the connection with the LGBT community, with our youth. I know with my own child's experiences with shame and things that just, I can just see that those services are so important. So it's heartbreaking to hear when they are not available. And I want to commend you. I can't imagine. I feel maybe this is my own lack of knowledge, but I feel like rolling a policy like that out in the VA, I'm sure you hit all kinds of obstacles. I'm sure it wasn't something easy to roll out. So I'm sure you could probably spend time talking about that. Yeah, I imagine you probably jumped through a bunch of hurdles to get that one through. So well done.
Well, if I might just reply to that we were so lucky. It actually was a moment where there was the right person at the highest state position in the VA nationally who was on board. And so I say this because oftentimes, even in situations where we might assume that, oh, there's going to be a lot of homophobia here or transphobia or biphobia, one leader can make all of the difference. I mean, I get shivers thinking about this, Richard, because it was huge. It just so happened that the person at the highest level of the VA in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion had a daughter who had a friend who was transgender. And that's why the person was committed to backing us up. And the other thing that I'll just say is that I think so many of us, I identify as queer. I use she, her pronouns. Forgive me for not having said that before. But, I also experienced severe depression from the homophobia that I was exposed to as the daughter of a gay father. And thank goodness that I was around LGBTQ people who were out and proud, because they helped me to tap into this beautiful, powerful history, her story that we have. There's so much for us to be proud about.
Oh my goodness. You gave me chills. I love that. Oh, and one leader, the power of one leader. I think I think that is a message that a thread we need to continue to pull through on this conversation, because we are all leaders, again, regardless of our titles. And I think you're kind of commenting on this, Eliana, and we can all make a change. We can all make an impact. And so beautiful. Thank you. Zach, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me a moment when your authenticity made a tangible impact.
Yeah, definitely. So, I think to give a little bit of extra context here, I feel like I'm at a very different place with my queer identity and my Latinidad than I was pre-pandemic. I started exploring more spaces where like both of those identities existed and where they existed together. And over, I think this was back in 2021 or 2022, I discovered this monthly queer Latina market called the Queer Mercado. And it was basically just a place for queer and Latina vendors to come together in community. And there were performances, there were food trucks, there were a lot of different artisanal vendors. I think I actually got my earrings from a vendor over there. And I'm not able to go every month, but whenever I do go, I just enjoy giving my money to those queer artists and learning about other organizations. So I mentioned earlier in this conversation that I was a leader on a Hispanic Latina resource group at Disney, um, and one thing that I've discovered is that it's always really amazing whenever bergs from different identities and dimensions of diversity can come together, because they both get to learn a little bit more about the other one's culture and how those intersect. Um, so one day, me and my team were just talking about some potential activations that we wanted to do with some other bergs, and I was thinking, hey, wait a minute, there was I think I remember seeing a queer Latin dance organization that I randomly followed one day at the Queer Mercado. So I reached out to them, I wrote them, we got some approvals in place, and remember that event I was talking about that I'm going to be doing next week? Yeah, we're going to be having a queer Latina dance instructor come and give a freestyle and partnered lesson to some of our employee base, and I'm really excited to see it happen. There were a lot of different hoops to jump through, but I'm just really excited celebrate to celebrate both of my identities coming together at work and being able to showcase just the joy that exists at that intersection to those who don't know about it yet.
Oh, that's awesome. There are so many points I want to pull from on that. I really enjoyed. First of all, the idea of a queer mercado. That is such a cool concept. I wish maybe they have it in my area. I need to look that up. But to be able to bring that to the workplace and to be able to have that is I know such probably amazing feeling to be able to bring those identities into the places that where they are important, where we're spending so much of our time. And Zach, I want to build upon you. You mentioned culture a couple of times, and I really kind of want to build upon that. I'm going to ask you a question, and I'll ask the other panelists as well. But when you think about your Latinidad, and staying rooted in your culture and your queer identity, what is it like to stay rooted in both of those identities while leading predominantly, in a predominantly non-diverse environment?
Recognizing that your identity is your own and you don't need to put yourself into a million other boxes that people believe that you should be in. If I had known that way earlier in my life, then I probably would have overcome whatever imposter syndrome I had much earlier. I think for me, being rooted in and I guess I'll talk about like both my Latin identity and my queer identity here. But with my Latin identity, I'm a No Sabo kid. I'm second generation. Um, and I didn't speak Spanish growing up. My family, I guess, was a little bit more Americanized. I grew up learning how to say tortilla properly, and that was really about it. And it wasn't until pandemic with all the conversations that were happening after George Floyd's death that I started really wondering, so how can I sort of explore my own identity? It's not really a question that I've had before. And that's when I decided to start getting involved in my employee resource groups. I discovered a program called Spanish Sin Pena not too long afterwards, which is a program designed for No Sabo kids to learn Spanish with other No Sabo kids in a safe space. And I think that really helped me understand that I am Latino, I mean, I might not speak Spanish and I might not listen to Bad Bunny, but I mean, I still celebrate Christmas Eve versus Christmas Day. I can still taste authentic guacamole. I still put my pots and pans in the oven. Um, and um, and I think it's like really just about being visible and being who you are because you might not fit your own mental image of what a Latin person looks like, but you can help redefine what that image looks like for other people just by showing up and being you. And you don't really have to silence different parts of yourself or amplify different parts of yourself
Mhm.
to help fit that mold. And I guess with my queer so that's the Latin part of things. With the queer side of things, um, again, this all happened post-pandemic as well, but my roommate ended up getting a contract on RuPaul's Drag Race for a spell helping out with financials. And he was like, oh, let's watch the season. I was like, oh, people talk about this a lot. Okay, I'll watch. So I started watching. I got really into it. I started exploring the gamer space, like gamer but gamer.
Mhm.
Um, and I met friends who lived near me who invited me to viewing parties, and I started sort of immersing myself in queer spaces that I didn't really think existed before, just because they weren't visible in mainstream media. And um, and now ultimately, like I'm able to introduce myself with my pronouns just because yes, I am cisgendered, but it invites space for those outside of the gender binary to
Mhm.
express their own identities as well. Um, and I guess just always challenging some gender norms in that capacity as well, because I've had some questions where they're like, "Oh yeah, well, do you have a girlfriend?" I'm like, "Oh no, I mean, like I'll find the right guy when it comes along, but just kind of I don't need to like break the door down. I can just kind of casually be like, "Oh yeah, it's open because I said so." Uh,
Yeah.
so ultimately, just figuring out what matters to you, who you are, and how that shows up in other spaces. I think I yapped a lot, so I will yield the floor back to you.
No, that was all very fantastic. I really like the response. I wrote some of it down. Um, what stood out to me is that, your identity is your own. You don't need to fit into someone else's box for that. I think that's brilliant. To your point, I wish I'd learned that younger as well. And I want to open the question up as well to our other panelists. I'm sure they also have some interesting perspectives. Maybe we can first go to Lily. Think about how do you stay rooted in your cultural and queer identities while leading in a predominantly non-diverse environment?
Resist.
Resist. I love it. Easy answer, right?
Resist. That's the first one, right? Resist and then recharge. But I'll start with resist. It has to be within your time, energy, and your reason because there can be risk in resisting. But it can be bold, right? You can organize, you
Mhm.
can speak up, or you can be quiet and just as powerful, being there for others. I think resistance can also, like identity, be very self-defined. And then the other thing I would say would be recharge, right? I very much ground
Mhm.
myself in intentional time with my partner, with my loved ones, my family, my sister, who's my best friend, and my niece. They're very, very important to me. So those cultural practices, whether it's just getting a little cheese make coffee time with a friend, being in places where I don't have to explain myself,
Yeah.
yeah, that's part of the recharge piece, right? We're resisting at some points, we're recharging at others. We're not on all the time. Where I am at currently is one of the most diverse settings that I've been in a workspace. But even now, I stand alone in some spaces, right?
Mhm.
As a woman, as a daughter of immigrants, as a queer person, I'm also navigating my own acculturation in the South. So I just remember, hey, this is who I'm accountable to, my family, myself, my chosen family, and then of course my niece, who is my next generation. And I think to myself what world I want for her. And that's usually when I decide how I want to resist.
I love that, and that's so well put, Lillian. I think this this idea of recharge, sometimes our society at large doesn't always value that as much as it should be. Like, I mean, especially when you are on the front lines and you are resisting and you are, trying to make the world a better place, it can wear you out. So yeah, I think recharge is just as important as fighting the good fight. So that was very well said. Eliana, how about you? How do you stay rooted in your identities?
Well, first, I just want to say I love us so much. Oh my gosh, Zach, Lily, you people, you keep talking, and I'm like, yes, like when I say
Yes.
pride, this is what I mean. It's this kind of a feeling. Like we're
Yes.
amazing. What you both have just shared, I'm just like, yeah. So I guess that's one of the first things that I do is I am really clear who fills my cup. And
Mm,
I gravitate toward people like that. There are plenty of haters that are out there. Let's let them go on with their thing, right? And I'm going to go spend my time with people who are able to meet the energy, the radical love that I have for our community.
mm,
I love that Lily was talking about that resistance. Like, right, my goodness, right now, more than anything, we need it. And the first pride was a riot. The first pride was a riot because a trans woman and a butch lesbian stood up at a bar and they said, no more. You
right.
cannot do this to us anymore. They were raiding these bars, the police and the mafia, and they were taking massive amounts of money from our community, beating the daylights out of us, and then blackmailing us in the media. And it was our community, especially women of color and people
Mm,
of color, who stood up and said, no more. And because of that, we have a pride that's celebrated the world over. Oh
mm,
my gosh, it's incredible
yeah.
what our community has done. And, so I think part of it for me is being really clear about who I spend my time around, where I put my energy. I think the other part is I look forward to our annual tamalada like nobody's business. Okay. In my hard moments, I sit there and I imagine being at the table with all of my tias and all of my cousins
Mm,
and 50 pounds of masa, right? And the hours that we'll sit there. And Lily talked about the cheese mate, like absolutely, right? So I'm
mhm,
imagining, what is the smell of that masa? How does it
mm,
feel when I'm smearing it? What does it feel like to be in a room that's so hot because we're at a table that's a little too small, right? In a space that's
mm,
a little bit too small. What I'm doing as I'm remembering every single detail, what I smell, what I see, what I feel, what I hear, what I taste, the brain has this capacity to take us back to those moments when we felt safer. And we can access that memory at any time. And that is what cultura does for me.
mm,
And so there's a real medicine, frankly, in our stories. And I think the other piece that I do is I think about the ancestral racialized labor trauma that is a part of my family, as well as the ancestral racialized resistance and
mm,
medicine and strength that nobody can ever take from me, no matter what. And those two pieces, being able to hold them at the same time. And I'll just put it out there, with my grandfather, when he first came over at 13, um, and he didn't have papers until he was 65. So that means he got picked up quite a lot when he would go out into the
mm,
fields in the morning. And they didn't know if he, when he left at 4 a.m., if he'd come back the day. And there were multiple times where he was disappeared. He was deported and they wouldn't hear from him for a long time. And so I am
mm,
feeling right now the terror of and the grief and the loss that so many in our community are experiencing, even if we have citizenship ourselves, or even if we have papeles ourselves. We
mhm,
know from research that depression and anxiety go up among Latina community when they do
mm.
these mass raids and deportations.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness, Eliana, you have a way of communicating that touches all of my senses. I just absolutely love it. And I totally agree. I think there's something special about finding that there's something, it's almost intangible, but there's something about that tamalada that I think it's symbolic of so many things that just feel right. And I thought that was beautifully put. And I also, it made me, I had to write down the note too, so I can take it and chew on this a little further. But this idea of carrying the identities of trauma as well as resistance in our past, in our history, and in past generations. I think that's brilliant. I really appreciated that. And I appreciated that you also talked about pride. So I'm going to go back to you, Lily. Clearly, Eliana talked with just excitement about pride in in today's world and how we lead. And so I want to ask you, when you think about pride, what does it mean to lead with pride to you personally? And how has that also evolved over time for you, Lily?
Thank you. Yo soy de raíces muy humildes, right? I'm a very humble person. I have a very humble background. Um, I am a US citizen, but I was in Mexico up until I was about 8 or 9, and then I came to the US, so I consider myself like a 1.5. Um, I was very humble, right? I like people would give me my roses, but it still felt weird to take them. So leading with pride now, and this is, an evolving conversation with myself and one of my closer friends that I have. It does mean disrupting systems that were not necessarily built with me in mind, but
Mhm.
also understanding that I bring a lot of value and perspective. And the reasons that I get brought into these positions, right, is because folks do want my insight and they want me to come forward with all the strengths that I have. You know, Currently, some of the work that I'm doing is bringing schools and industry together, right? I know alone that's not enough. So Pride really reminds me, hey, let's ask deeper questions. Who
Mhm.
maybe still isn't really in the room, who isn't necessarily a part of a conversation at this time? What experiences are we overlooking, or what experiences are we frequently putting front and center, right? Um,
Mhm.
it's a mindset that, I have to continuously reprogram myself to have. But I think I want to be really intentional, and sometimes that starts with interrogation, just asking questions. And asking questions is another really, really good way to resist.
Mhm.
I learned that from my niece, who recurrently asks us why for everything. You did this to me? Why? So I think it does work to open those doors that so much need that opening, that WD-40, and
Mhm.
just start addressing those barriers.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, the status quo isn't going to change unless we ask the questions and start questioning it. I love that you're tying this concept of pride to asking questions, to being curious, to saying, hey, who's not at the table? What voice are we missing out? That's really brilliant, Lily. Thank you for sharing that. And Zach, how about you? This idea of pride. What does it mean to lead with pride to you, and how has that evolved for you?
Yeah, so Lily, that part where you were mentioning just your more humble roots and like being given your flowers and being like, "Oh, thanks, I guess. I don't not deserve these," but um that's something that I've been challenging myself with over the past few years, especially in terms of things that I've been able to accomplish or make happen. And I think one thing that's been becoming clearer to me is um, all of the stories that happen like after we leave and the impression that we have on people when we're not necessarily there. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to like not necessarily rest on my laurels, but I'm going to like elevate myself up a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
and say that because I've been more active um, in the burbs and just in my day job at work, um, I'll just recognize a few more people when I go out into the studio a lot, and I basically just say yes to different things, and I always end up running into somebody that I know. And if I'm ever with a friend, they're like, "Oh, Zach, you're so popular." And mind you, I was not a popular kid in middle school, high school, or college or anything like that. So to have that label put on me now, I'm like, I thank you. I guess I just sort of know people. I don't know. But then people have also told me, hey, we really have some like they really liked you. And I'm like, oh, I guess so. And it's just sort of accepting the fact that you do exist outside of your own sort of immediate sphere
Mm-hmm.
and think about how you make other people feel. And like Lily was talking about a little bit earlier, just asking the right questions. And the type of questions that I like to ask are a little bit more open-ended and get people to reveal a little bit more information than just a simple yes or no answer. Like,
Mm-hmm.
did you have a good week versus how was your week? for example. And all this to say is that leading with pride for me means thinking about who else might be, like, what younger version of myself might be watching, or what younger person who might be like me might be watching, who I could be some sort of role model for. Um, and thinking about how I interact with the world, and just being genuine, I think is what it comes down to, because authenticity is a really big value for me. And I'm also a notoriously bad liar as well. So I think just putting your best foot forward, and saying, hey, this is how I live my life. Um, because I live my life this way, maybe I can open the door for somebody else to live their life in a similar way. One woman who I absolutely admire, respect. I want her to go so many places in life. She leads one of the Black resource groups at work. And she said that one of her main motivations was the film Hidden Figures. And she was like, wait, there were other Black women in technology working in the 50s, and we couldn't have gone to space without them. I don't want to be a hidden figure. So ultimately, leading with pride means not being a hidden figure and opening that door for people to come after you.
That's fantastic. And yeah, I think you mentioning authenticity, I think, is such an important part. I mean, as leaders, as individuals, I mean, I think when people aren't authentic, the old saying of "fake it till you make it," I think is flawed, because people can see through it, and we work with really smart people. We're surrounded by people that they can see through it. So I think authenticity is it takes intentionality, it takes courage. I thought that was a great message. And role modeling the behavior that we want to see. I think that's fantastic as well. That's great. Eliana, I'd like to go back to you if I may. I'm so intrigued by the environment you work in the VA, and I'm wondering, when you think about, and it doesn't have to be just at work, it could be a community as well, but like, I'm thinking about what we're doing here. We're creating space, to hear voices, your experiences. What are some practical ways that those who've dialed in for this webinar, what are some practical ways people can ensure voices and experiences of other, LGBTQ, Latina individuals so to ensure that they're uplifted, those voices are heard and have a space? What do you think about that?
That's a really great question. And I'm no longer at the VA. I now run a company called Workplace Trauma Recovery, LLC.
Yes.
And so, but when I was at the VA, I would say that some of the things, I mean, I really thought it was going to be an environment where it wouldn't be okay to talk about LGBTQ stuff. And honestly, in some ways, it wasn't. The posters that I would put up for the LGBT veteran support groups that I ran were frequently defiled. People would write homophobic slurs on them. I went to my car one night, my windshield had been destroyed, and there was not like a big branch or anything there. But honestly, I think that my feminist really protected me quite a bit. I think that had I presented in a more androgynous or masculine way, I would not be surprised at all that I would have potentially dealt with some actual physical danger to myself, because that's what happens oftentimes when we break those gender roles. Recognizing the privilege that I have, the advantage, frankly, that I have as a femme in a society that, has a whole bunch of different rules about how femmes are supposed to show up in and of themselves, and my light complexion as a mixed race Chicana. I think that those pieces, the first and foremost is like to acknowledge where we do have advantage, and then to leverage that, and to make sure that we are not using those advantages in ways that harm other people. I think that when we created an all-gender bathroom project, so proud of this work, immediately brought in the women's resource group, because many people benefit from a single stall bathroom. People who have an attendant who help them use the restroom, people who have a baby who need to change a diaper. And so seeing how a structural change can benefit multiple communities, and bringing those communities together is a great way to increase the power that we have to make system change. And For example, another side of this is like the cutouts that we have in street corners. That's because of the incredible work of people who were disability activists, and they created those cutouts. Well, they benefit people who push strollers as much as people who are also in wheelchairs. So we oftentimes have more power than we might be aware of, and certainly than the systems around us want us to realize. So ensuring that we can connect with other communities and do so in a way that recognizes anti-Blackness, that recognizes and eradicates the invisibility of Indigenous people, of people who are gender diverse, that we want to create space starting with the people who are most marginalized and in danger of being hurt.
Amazing. Gosh, that's so well put. I'm so enjoying this conversation, and Lily, I'm equally fascinated by you doing this work in an ISD in a school district. What are some of the things that you do to make sure voices and experiences are heard and are uplifted?
So I work with ISDs, but I'm no longer at an ISD. I'm actually within a national network that supports ISDs with industry partnerships. So I think it's really important, especially keeping Prospanica in mind, right? Creating inclusive leadership pipelines and being very intentional about that in the long term. So I think some really actionable steps that I could offer for other leaders is, you know, providing leadership opportunities to their employees or whoever's on their team and recognizing that talent is mobile. Folks do have options, and it's not that they're not committed to a certain role, but people will not stay at a place that's not for them, right? In my experience, if I know that, maybe I only have this person for a certain time, we sit down and have a conversation about what their long-term goals are. Because when I invest in their long-term goals and their development, I really, really maximize like the amount of impact that we do during this role, right? I think on the other side of that, when we're talking about students and youth and the Latino population at the rate that it's growing within the United States, right? Investing in access for Latino youth is like for the benefit of everyone. So I think those would be the two that I would say.
That's amazing. Thank you for that. I have so enjoyed this conversation, and I want to also give the opportunity to those who have dialed in to ask questions. But first, I really want to say thank you so much to all of our speakers here. It's been very powerful, inspiring conversation. I've clearly been, I don't know if you've seen me, my hands hurting for trying to write down notes, things I want to kind of chew on more after this call. But it's really given me some meaningful insights into like what is inclusive leadership and how can we redefine that. And really thinking about intersectional identities. And your stories, to me, they reflect this theme of today of pride and progreso and what it means to lead authentically. And, it's really been about redefining leadership. So I'm really excited, but I do think there will be some good questions from our audience. And so I want to give time for that. We've actually had a few live questions come in. So please take this opportunity. If you're in the audience and you're enjoying this conversation as much as I am, please submit a question. We'd love to hear what our panelists have to say. And I'll start with the first question that's been submitted here. So the question is, have you faced barriers in your professional life due to your identity, and what helped you overcome them? And so, Zach, I'd like to start with you.
So I'm going to say yes, but not necessarily but they weren't necessarily institutional barriers. I think for me, the first thing that comes to mind is, I guess when I was in college, I definitely did suffer from a lot of internalized racism and a lot of internalized homophobia. Like I wanted to be a little bit more involved with the Latin groups on campus, but they met at a certain time, and I was like, oh, I don't want to be the token Latin guy on my floor going off to do like Latin things. I don't want people to stereotype me that way. So I just didn't get as involved as I could have. And I think I kind of shot myself in the foot in that capacity because I was so obsessed with the idea of not wanting to be a stereotype that I really missed out on an opportunity for professional growth.
Hmm.
I will say, fast forward some number of years later, when I was working as a study abroad recruiter, I was I was traveling around to different high schools helping market a study abroad program. And I was at a college fair at a primarily Black school district somewhere in New York. And there was one student who came up to me. I think I might have been the only recruiter of color, maybe the only visible recruiter of color. Um, but she asked like, "Hey, am I gonna have any sorts of problems because I'm..." And then we kind of exchanged this look, and I was like, "I've got you."
Hmm.
Um, so I think just going out there and being visible and seeing people who might have been othered in their own ways can really help alleviate some of those barriers as long as you're willing to ask.
That's fantastic. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's really insightful. And I'm interested too. Lily, in your experience, I would love for you to build off of what was shared here with that Zach shared. And when you think about your own identity, how did you overcome any barriers that you may have faced?
And I wanted to clarify the question, Richard. Is this
Yeah.
within
So yeah,
institutions or within a
it can be
workplace
personal,
or
any barriers, but
anywhere?
personal life. I'm building off a question that was from the audience, but it says professional life, barriers you may have faced in your professional life due to your identity, and what helped you overcome them.
Yeah, I mean, I can think of a few, but I'm trying to focus on one that I can share safely. I think coming to terms with myself during college and within my own identity, I think just approaching how I wanted to show up in spaces and places. I think what
Mm,
helped me overcome them is community, but in a way that's like not, how can I put this? I started off with just volunteering certain places, meeting other people, and I think I mentioned in a question earlier where it's like I don't have to provide an explanation to anyone,
mhm.
and you don't have to be boxed in certain identifying factors of what identity is supposed to look like. So I think coming to understand that and overcoming that had a lot to do with the folks that I was working with, where it wasn't necessary where we looked at each other and we were like, because it was harder,
Mm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, and then I think the other one is seeing, other women in professional spaces that had similar identities and were just like killing it. Where I was like, hey, how did you do this? And they would tell me,
Mhm.
like, I did it and I did it scared. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I'm just going to do it scared and we'll find out. And that's how I can be here today and
Yeah.
do it, with a little bit more confidence. That was a good question. Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, and thank you. I know it puts you on the spot, but it was a beautiful answer, and I appreciate your just being real about it. I think it was a great do it scared. I'm gonna have a T-shirt made with that. So I think that is super powerful. It's simple and powerful. I think it's fantastic. I'm going to change gears to another question, and it's a question I was going to ask earlier, but I'm glad the audience asked, and I'll direct it to Liana first, and we're going to shift gears and talk about allies and allyship. So the question from the audience is, what are some strategies allies can use to take calculated risks to resist and stand up in this environment and recharge to avoid feeling broken down or burned out? So some strategies allies can take, Eliana, what would you recommend?
Yeah, so that's $1 million question. And I just want to affirm whoever posted that question in the first place. Thank you. Thank you.
Mm,
We need our allies more now than ever. And the truth is that to really be an ally means that we're going to get hot sometimes because we're standing near the heat. And
mm,
so it is a matter of being aware that if our allyship does not come with some discomfort, then we may not actually be challenging the status quo in a way that our LGBTQIA plus siblings, need. And
Yeah.
so I think it's really wise to say, yeah, there's some calculation here, and just encouraging folks to think that for people who cannot pass as heterosexual, as cisgender, they don't have a choice. There's no choice there. So the fact that anyone even has a choice, that's a level of advantage. And generally speaking, the systems will come down harder on the LGBTQIA plus person, and that's why we need our heterosexual and cisgender allies to speak up. But specifically to that question, I would say finding other heterosexual cisgender people who are working on allyship is really, really, really important. And then the second piece is learn the history. Queer communities have a history of resistance with style and pizzazz and camp and humor, and like we I don't know, we've got a lot in our families, in our histories, that can really be helpful to people who are heterosexual and cisgender as well, like how we use humor and to turn the power dynamics very quickly in a moment in a heterosexual cisgenderist society. That's something that everybody can tap into, but learning some of that. So I would really recommend, for folks who haven't seen it, little community insider info, there is a documentary called Paris is Burning. I would recommend this to the T. And had I thought it through ahead of time, I would have brought the little scene where there's somebody doing executive realness. And what happens is it's a person at a drag ball who's in a suit. Actually, there are multiple people who are in suits, and they're doing a walk down like a catwalk. And the whole point of this is that queer people, brown and Black queer people, can be executives. We can be executives. Now, whether or not society allows us to get into the echelons of power is another thing. But what we can do it, and we can show up in a way that is not limited by the imaginations of other people. So there's some beautiful history in that film, and it might just spark some of that energy as well.
Not limited by other people's lack of imagination. That's so powerful. It's fantastic. I'm definitely going to check that documentary out. Thank you for the recommendation. Zach, I'm going to go back to you. I think about strategies for allies, and what have you seen work at Disney? What when you think about the allies that have been the most supportive in that corporate environment, what does that look like?
So my favorite quote about allyship comes from a video. I think her name is Francesca, and she goes by like Cheska Lee. She did a video some number of years ago, just comparing allyship to Destiny's Child. Like, being an ally, you are not the Beyonce, you are not the Kelly, you are the Michelle. People are not paying attention to you, and you're not the star of the show, but we wouldn't be where we are without you. So with that in context, it's really about listening to the communities being impacted, or the communities that you want to show up as an active ally for, and really just speaking up for the people who aren't in the room. So if somebody ever says, like, oh yeah, he did this, and they're just blatantly like misgendering somebody, just gently being like, oh yeah, well, they were saying, or whatever the person's pronouns are, and just doing things like that. Maybe also for the queer community specifically, maybe just having a like some sort of ally merchandise. That always really helps me out as well, especially if I'm in a room with somebody who visibly doesn't share any of my identities. And as far as any other strategies that I can think of that have worked, those are the biggest ally talking points that I can think of right now. I wish I knew a little bit more of an effective way to engage more of them, because I think objectively there are probably more allies than there are. Well, there's more folks in the majority community than the minority community. That's just how the That's just kind of how it works by definition. But yeah, that's what I've got so far.
Yeah, no, those are great strategies. All of these responses have just been wonderful. And we do have a few minutes left. I would love to hear some strategies from Lily as well. Lily, if you just have a few that you'd like to share for the audience, I know it's always helpful.
Zach, I watch a lot of Abbott Elementary, and your Michelle is so much better than the allies should be seen, not heard, because we should be hearing from allies, but
Mm,
also, places and spaces. So I love that response. That was really good.
yeah.
I'm going to go back to resisting within your energy capacity and then would encourage interest. There are a lot of immediate ways to get involved and support that are closer to your community than you know. I myself am, I'm part of an ERG within my place of work, and we do have a lot of allies that also take part. Outside of that, I'm also a Coug. So go Cougs. I'm part of the LGBTQIA alumni group for the University of Houston, and some of the work that they support is lavender graduations for students. They do fundraisers, they support a lot of other events within the greater Houston area. And it's a great way to get involved, volunteer or give your hard-earned cash to organizations that are making very direct impact as an ally. And that's one example that I would give, but there are queer people everywhere. So there are plenty of other ways to get involved that start within something that's already in your lane. And I think, an alumni association is just a start, but I wanted to give
Mm,
that direct example.
that's a great example. Yeah. And I've kind of heard this from all of you, but sometimes it's just the small things that people do that can really resonate and have a broader impact. But this has been just such an amazing conversation. I really wish we could continue this. I wish we were all in the same room and could just continue talking all night, because I could listen to all three of you for hours on this topic. But I really want to thank everyone that joined us today. It was a very powerful conversation about redefining leadership through diversity, and really this conversation reminds us that leadership is not about fitting a mold. It's really about showing up, being fully, being bold, being authentic. And I want to thank our panelists for sharing, powerful reflections on that, and how to navigate identity and challenging systems and recharging so you can do that, creating space for others. I think these are just amazing topics that even expand beyond Pride Month, obviously, but something that we can, bring into our daily life and practices. So as we close today's session, I want to invite you, audience, thank you for being here with us. Please carry these insights forward into your workplaces and your communities, on your personal journeys. We want to continue to uplift the voices in our community that so often go unheard, and remember that redefining leadership starts with each of us. Each of us play a role, and it requires that each of us be courageous and empathetic and live a purpose-driven life. So a special thank you to our panelists, as well as a special thank you to our Prospanica National for just their ongoing commitment to empowering Latinos in the workplace. It's such a privilege for me to be able to be a part of these conversations. I'm so grateful that Prospanica lets me be a part of it, and I get to be with wonderful people like the panelists in this room. From all of us at the Prospanica Center for Social Justice, thank you for being a part of this important conversation, and happy Pride Month, and may your progreso continue. Thank you very much.
Happy Pride Month, y'all. Take care.
Happy
Pride
Pride.
Month, everyone.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Happy Pride.
Goodbye.